Jammu and Kashmir is a region of breathtaking beauty. It is located in the northernmost part of the Indian subcontinent. It is often called paradise on earth because of its stunning mountains, green valleys, and serene lakes. But this paradise has a troubled soul. Its strategic location makes it incredibly important. It shares borders with both Pakistan and China, two countries with which India has had complex and often difficult relationships. This geographical position has placed Jammu and Kashmir at the center of a geopolitical storm for over 7 decades. The story of this land is not just about its scenic landscapes. It is a story of politics, identity, conflict, and the everyday lives of people caught in the crossfire of history. Understanding Jammu and Kashmir is crucial to understanding the politics of South Asia. The region is more than just a piece of land. It is a symbol. For India, it represents the heart of its secular identity, a Muslim-majority region that chose to be part of a diverse, pluralistic nation. For Pakistan, it is seen as the unfinished business of the 1947 partition, a territory it believes should have naturally become part of its nation based on religion. This fundamental disagreement has fueled a relentless and bitter rivalry. The dispute over this territory has shaped the foreign policies, military strategies, and national identities of both India and Pakistan since their inception as independent nations. The importance of Jammu and Kashmir extends beyond India and Pakistan. It is a flashpoint that has drawn international attention for decades. The United Nations has been involved since the very first conflict, and major world powers have often watched the region with concern. The potential for a conflict between two nuclear-armed neighbors makes the Kashmir issue a matter of global security. The involvement of China, which also claims parts of the territory, adds another layer of complexity to an already tangled web of disputes. The fate of Jammu and Kashmir is therefore not just a local or a regional issue. It has far-reaching implications for stability across the world. For the people who live there, this constant state of conflict has defined their existence. Their lives are a paradox. They live amidst unparalleled natural beauty, yet their days are often marked by fear, uncertainty, and violence. The political debates in New Delhi, Islamabad, and even Beijing have a direct and profound impact on their daily routines, their livelihoods, their safety, and their future aspirations. Their voices, their stories, and their hopes are sometimes lost in the loud rhetoric of nationalistic politics. This essay aims to tell their story, to explain the complex history of Jammu and Kashmir in a way that is easy to understand, tracing its journey from a princely state to a modern-day union territory at the heart of a global dispute. Long before it became a headline for conflict, Jammu and Kashmir was a crossroads of civilizations. Its history is a rich and diverse tapestry woven with threads from different cultures, religions, and empires. For centuries, it was a major center for Hindu and Buddhist philosophies. Great scholars and thinkers thrived here, leaving behind ancient temples and monasteries that still stand today as silent witnesses to a glorious past. Later, the region became a beacon of Sufi Islam, which blended with the local traditions to create a unique and syncretic culture known as Kashmiriyat. This philosophy emphasized harmony, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence among different communities, a value that defined the Kashmiri way of life for a very long time. The region was ruled by a succession of dynasties, each leaving its mark on the land and its people. The Mughals, who were captivated by its beauty, built exquisite gardens like Shalimar Bagh and Nishat Bagh in Srinagar, which remain iconic attractions. They considered Kashmir their private paradise, a summer retreat from the scorching heat of the Indian plains. After the decline of the Mughal Empire, the region was governed by Afghan rulers, followed by the Sikhs under Maharaja Ranjit Singh. This period of Sikh rule was significant, but it eventually gave way to the Dogra dynasty. In 1846, the British sold the territory of Kashmir to the Dogra ruler Gulab Singh, who then became the Maharaja of the newly formed princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. Under the Dogra rulers, the state of Jammu and Kashmir was a mosaic of different regions and peoples. It was not a single uniform entity. The state comprised 3 main regions: the Kashmir Valley, which was predominantly Muslim and Kashmiri-speaking; Jammu, which had a Hindu majority population of Dogras, and the vast, sparsely populated frontier region of Ladakh, which was home to Buddhists of Tibetan origin. There were also other ethnic and religious groups, including Gujars, Bakawals, and Paharis, each with their own distinct culture and language. This immense diversity was both a strength and a challenge, as the different communities had unique histories and aspirations that were not always aligned with one another. As the Indian independence movement gained momentum in the early 20th century, political consciousness began to rise in Jammu and Kashmir as well. The popular movement against the Dogra monarchy was led by Sheikh Abdullah and his political party, the National Conference. Initially, this movement was focused on securing rights for the Muslim majority against what they saw as a feudal and oppressive Hindu ruler. However, Sheikh Abdullah's vision was secular and progressive. He forged a strong political and personal bond with Jawaharlal Nehru, the future Prime Minister of India. This relationship would prove to be one of the most decisive factors in shaping the destiny of Jammu and Kashmir when the British finally decided to leave the subcontinent in 1947. The year 1947 was a moment of great upheaval across the Indian subcontinent. The British Empire was coming to an end, and the decision was made to partition the land into two new independent nations, a secular but Hindu-majority India and a Muslim-majority Pakistan. The rulers of the more than 500 princely states were given a choice. They could join either India or Pakistan, or theoretically remain independent. For Maharaja Hari Singh, the Hindu ruler of Muslim-majority Jammu and Kashmir, this was an incredibly difficult decision. He was caught between his personal leanings, the complex demographics of his state, and the intense political pressure from both newly formed dominions. He initially dreamt of an independent Kashmir, a Switzerland of the East. This hesitation created a dangerous power vacuum. Pakistan, confident that a Muslim-majority state would naturally accede to it, grew impatient with the Maharaja's indecisiveness. In October 1947, this impatience boiled over into action. Thousands of armed Pashtun tribesmen from Pakistan's northwest frontier province, supported by elements of the Pakistani army, invaded Kashmir. Their goal was to capture the state's capital, Srinagar, and force the Maharaja's hand. The invasion was brutal and swift. The tribal forces advanced rapidly, leaving a trail of violence and destruction. They overwhelmed the Maharaja's small and ill-equipped state forces, creating a state of panic and chaos across the valley. Faced with the imminent fall of Srinagar and the collapse of his kingdom, Maharaja Hari Singh made a desperate plea for help to India. The Indian leadership, led by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and Home Minister Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, agreed to provide military assistance, but on one critical condition. The Maharaja had to formally accede to India first. With the raiders closing in on his capital, Hari Singh had no other choice. On October 26, 1947, he signed the Instrument of Accession, the legal document that made Jammu and Kashmir a part of the Dominion of India. This accession was legally the same as that signed by hundreds of other princely states, but its circumstances would make it the most contested one in history. The very next day, on October 27, 1947, Indian troops were airlifted into Srinagar. They arrived just in time to halt the advance of the tribal invaders on the outskirts of the city. This marked the beginning of the first war between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. The Indian army managed to push back the invaders and secure the Kashmir Valley, Jammu, and Ladakh. However, the Pakistani forces and the tribesmen retained control of a significant portion of the western and northern parts of the state. This military confrontation solidified the division of Jammu and Kashmir, creating a de facto border that would soon become known as the Line of Control. The accession was complete, but the conflict had just begun. The signing of the Instrument of Accession in 1947 was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a long and bloody conflict. The First War, which began with the tribal invasion, lasted for over a year. It ended on January 1, 1949, after the United Nations intervened and brokered a ceasefire. By then, the original princely state was divided. The part controlled by India became the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The part controlled by Pakistan became known as Azad Kashmir, or Free Kashmir, and the northern areas, now called Gilgit-Baltistan. The ceasefire line, monitored by UN observers, became the effective border, but it was a line drawn in sand, not a permanent international boundary, leaving the dispute unresolved and festering. The second major conflict over Kashmir erupted in 1965. This time, Pakistan launched a covert operation codenamed Operation Gibraltar. The plan was to send trained infiltrators across the ceasefire line to incite a local uprising against Indian rule in the Kashmir Valley. Pakistan's leadership believed that the Kashmiri people were unhappy and would rise in rebellion. However, the plan failed. The local population did not support the infiltrators and, in many cases, reported them to the Indian authorities. India responded by launching a full-scale military attack across the international border outside of Kashmir, escalating the conflict into an all-out war. The war ended in a stalemate after 3 weeks, with both sides claiming victory but gaining no territory. The most decisive war between the two countries took place in 1971. While this war was primarily fought over the liberation of East Pakistan, which became the independent nation of Bangladesh, it had significant consequences for the Kashmir issue. The Indian military won a clear and overwhelming victory, leading to the surrender of over 90,000 Pakistani soldiers. In the aftermath of the war, the leaders of both countries, Indira Gandhi of India and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto of Pakistan, met in the Indian city of Shimla. They signed the Shimla Agreement in 1972. This agreement was a landmark moment. Both sides agreed to resolve their differences, including the Kashmir dispute, through peaceful bilateral negotiations, thereby reducing the role of third-party or international mediation. A fourth major conflict, though limited in scale, occurred in 1999 in the Kargil district of Kashmir. Pakistani soldiers, disguised as militants, infiltrated across the line of control and occupied strategic high-altitude posts on the Indian side. This gave them a significant military advantage, as they could target a key Indian highway. The Indian Army launched a major counter-offensive called Operation Vijay to reclaim the occupied peaks. The fighting took place in extremely difficult high-altitude terrain. After several weeks of intense combat, India successfully recaptured all the occupied posts. The Kargil conflict was a major military and diplomatic setback for Pakistan and brought the two nuclear-armed nations dangerously close to a full-scale war. When Jammu and Kashmir acceded to India, it did so under, really unique circumstances. The accession was not unconditional. To honor the terms under which the state joined the Indian Union and to address the special conditions of the time, a unique constitutional provision was created. This was Article 370 of the Indian Constitution. It was intended to be a temporary provision that granted a significant degree of autonomy to Jammu and Kashmir. It acted as a constitutional bridge between the state and the rest of India. Under this article, the Indian Parliament's power to make laws for the state was limited to just 3 subjects: defense, foreign affairs, and communications. These were the very subjects specified in the Instrument of Accession signed by Maharaja Hari Singh. This special status meant that Jammu and Kashmir had its own separate constitution, its own state flag, and a different set of laws compared to other Indian states. For any other law passed by the Indian Parliament to be applied to the state, it required the concurrence or agreement of the state government. This arrangement gave the state's political leadership a great deal of control over its internal affairs. One of the most significant aspects of this autonomy was Article 35A, which stemmed from Article 370. This article empowered the state legislature to define permanent residents of the state and provide them with special rights and privileges, particularly in areas like public employment, acquisition of immovable property, and scholarships. The purpose behind Article 370 was, pretty complex. For Indian leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru, it was a way to reassure the people of Kashmir, particularly the Muslim majority, that their unique identity and autonomy would be respected within the Indian Union. It was seen as a way to win their hearts and minds and to integrate them emotionally and politically into the fabric of India. It was also a fulfillment of the promise made to the state's popular leader, Sheikh Abdullah, who was instrumental in securing the accession to India instead of Pakistan. The article was meant to provide a framework for a relationship based on trust and mutual respect, acknowledging the exceptional context of the state's integration. However, over the decades, Article 370 became a subject of intense political debate within India. For its supporters, it was the fundamental basis of Jammu and Kashmir's relationship with India, a sacred promise that could not be broken. They argued that it protected the distinct cultural and demographic character of the state. For its critics, particularly within nationalist circles, the article was seen as a barrier to complete integration. They argued that it created a sense of separatism, fostered a psychological distance between Kashmir and the rest of the country, and prevented the economic development of the state by restricting outside investment. This debate raged for years, making Article 370 one of the most controversial provisions in the Indian Constitution. The late 1980s marked a dark and violent turning point in the history of Jammu and Kashmir. Following the state assembly elections of 1987, which were widely alleged to have been rigged, massive political discontent erupted across the Kashmir Valley. Many young Kashmiris who had participated in the elections felt cheated and lost faith in the democratic process. This widespread disillusionment created fertile ground for radicalization. A new, armed insurgency seeking secession from India began to take root. This movement was heavily supported, funded and armed by Pakistan, which saw an opportunity to revive the Kashmir issue and bleed India through a proxy war. The year 1989 is often cited as the official start of this bloody chapter. The nature of the conflict was brutal and all-encompassing. Militant groups, with names like the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front and Hizbul Mujahideen, emerged and began to target symbols of the Indian state. They attacked security forces, government officials and civilians suspected of being informers. The violence escalated rapidly, plunging the valley into a state of fear and chaos. The Indian government responded with a massive deployment of army and paramilitary forces to crush the insurgency. This led to a cycle of violence, with crackdowns, curfews, search operations, and gun battles becoming a part of daily life for ordinary Kashmiris. The once peaceful valley was transformed into one of the most militarized zones in the world. One of the most tragic consequences of this period was the targeted killing and forced exodus of the Kashmiri Pandit community. The Pandits are the original Hindu inhabitants of the Kashmir Valley, a small but influential minority. In late 1989 and early 1990, they were systematically targeted by militants. Posters were put up on their doors and hit lists were circulated. They were given three choices: convert to Islam, leave the valley, or be killed. Faced with this terrifying threat, the vast majority of the community, estimated to be several 100,000 people, were forced to flee their ancestral homes overnight. They became refugees in their own country, living in squalid camps in Jammu and other parts of India, a painful symbol of the conflict's human cost. The insurgency has had a devastating impact on the psyche and society of Kashmir. Decades of violence have left deep scars. Thousands of people, civilians, militants, and security personnel have lost their lives. An entire generation has grown up knowing nothing but conflict. The economy, heavily reliant on tourism and horticulture, was shattered. Schools and colleges were frequently closed, and normal life was constantly disrupted. The culture of Kashmiriyat, which celebrated religious harmony, was severely damaged by the rise of religious extremism and the departure of the Pandit community. The valley became a place of grief, mistrust, and polarization, caught between the militants' guns and the state's security apparatus. As the insurgency evolved, it became increasingly dominated by foreign jihadist groups sponsored by Pakistan. The initial, more nationalist phase of the movement gave way to a radical Islamist agenda. Groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed composed largely of Pakistani and other foreign fighters, became the most prominent and violent actors in the conflict. Their goal was not just the secession of Kashmir, but the establishment of an Islamic caliphate and the liberation of all Muslims in India. This shift changed the dynamics of the conflict, making it more brutal and ideologically driven. These groups introduced suicide bombings and fedayeen attacks, a tactic previously unseen in the valley, leading to higher casualties and a greater sense of terror. These Pakistan-based terror groups did not confine their activities to Jammu and Kashmir. They used the territory as a launching pad to carry out major terror attacks across India, aiming to destabilize the entire country. The 2001 attack on the Indian Parliament in New Delhi, carried out by Jaish-e-Mohammed, brought India and Pakistan to the brink of a full-scale war. The most audacious and horrific of these attacks was the 2008 Mumbai siege, where a team of 10 Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists rampaged through the city for 3 days, killing 166 people. These attacks demonstrated the long reach of the terror infrastructure based in Pakistan and repeatedly strained relations between the two nuclear-armed neighbors, making any meaningful dialogue almost impossible. Within Kashmir itself, the cycle of violence continued with devastating regularity. Major attacks on security convoys and army camps became a hallmark of the conflict. In 2016, an attack on an army base in Uri killed 19 Indian soldiers. This prompted India to conduct surgical strikes across the line of control, targeting what it called terrorist launch pads. This was a significant shift in India's policy, demonstrating a new willingness to retaliate across the border. A similar, even more dangerous crisis unfolded in February 2019 after a suicide bomber from Jaish-e-Mohammed attacked a paramilitary convoy in Pulwama, killing 40 personnel. This attack was the deadliest in 3 decades and triggered a major military escalation. In response to the Pulwama attack, the Indian Air Force conducted airstrikes deep inside Pakistani territory, targeting a Jaish-e-Mohammed training camp in Balakot. This was the first time since the 1971 war that Indian fighter jets had crossed into undisputed Pakistani airspace. Pakistan retaliated the next day, leading to an aerial dogfight in which an Indian fighter jet was shot down and its pilot captured. He was later returned. This tit-for-tat escalation brought the subcontinent closer to war than at any time since the Kargil conflict. These events highlighted the extreme fragility of the security situation and the constant risk that a single terror attack in Kashmir could spiral into a wider, catastrophic conflict. On August 5, 2019, the government of India, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, took a historic and highly controversial step. It revoked Article 370 of the Constitution, thereby ending the special status and autonomy that Jammu and Kashmir had held for 70 years. Simultaneously, the government introduced a bill to bifurcate the state. The state of Jammu and Kashmir was reorganized into 2 separate union territories. The Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, which would have a legislative assembly, and the Union Territory of Ladakh, which would be administered directly by the central government without an assembly. This was a monumental decision that fundamentally altered the political and constitutional landscape of the region. The government's justification for this move was multifaceted. It argued that Article 370 had been a temporary provision that had outlived its usefulness. Officials claimed that it had fostered separatism, enabled corruption, and hindered the economic development of the region by preventing outside investment. The government stated that the revocation of special status was necessary to fully integrate Jammu and Kashmir with the rest of India, to apply all Indian laws to the region, and to ensure that all citizens enjoyed the same rights. It was presented as a move that would bring development, peace, and prosperity to a region that had suffered from decades of conflict and political uncertainty. To prevent any violent backlash or protests against the decision, the government imposed an unprecedented security lockdown and communications blackout in the Kashmir Valley. Thousands of additional troops were deployed. Major political leaders, including former chief ministers like Omar Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti, were placed under house arrest, and internet and phone services were completely shut down for months. These measures were heavily criticized by human rights organizations and some international observers as a suppression of civil liberties. The government defended them as necessary precautions to maintain law and order and prevent loss of life in a volatile environment. The long-term impact of this decision is still unfolding and remains a subject of intense debate. Supporters of the move point to a decrease in large-scale street protests and stone-pelting incidents, an increase in tourist numbers, and a new central government development projects as signs of positive change. They argue that it has weakened the separatist movement. However, critics and many locals express deep resentment and a sense of disenfranchisement. They feel that their identity has been erased and that a major political decision was imposed on them without their consent. The political landscape has been altered, but the underlying feelings of alienation and mistrust in the valley continue to pose a significant challenge. The Jammu and Kashmir dispute has never been just a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. It has always been played out on a larger geopolitical chessboard, with international powers playing significant and often conflicting roles. Pakistan has consistently tried to internationalize the Kashmir issue, raising it at every possible global forum, most notably the United Nations and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Its diplomatic strategy has been to portray Kashmir as a case of human rights violations and a struggle for self-determination, seeking to put international pressure on India. However, its own track record of sponsoring cross-border terrorism has significantly weakened its credibility and limited its success in garnering widespread international support for its position. China is another crucial player with direct stakes in the region. It has its own border dispute with India and occupies a large swathe of territory in Aksai Chin, which was historically part of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. China also controls the Shaksgam Valley, which was illegally ceded to it by Pakistan in 1963. After India's revocation of Article 370 and the creation of Ladakh as a separate union territory, China reacted strongly. It saw the move as a challenge to its sovereignty claims in the region. This has led to increased tensions along the line of actual control, culminating in the violent border clashes in the Galwan Valley in 2020, the deadliest confrontation between the two countries in over 4 decades. The stance of the wider international community, particularly the United States and other Western powers, has evolved over time. During the Cold War, the United States often tilted towards Pakistan, its ally in the fight against the Soviet Union. However, in recent decades, especially after the 9/11 attacks and the rise of global jihadism, the perspective has shifted. There is now a greater understanding of India's position on Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. Most major world powers now officially view Kashmir as a bilateral issue to be resolved between India and Pakistan, as stipulated in the Shimla Agreement. They urge both sides to exercise restraint and engage in dialogue, but they have largely failed. Today, as we stand in mid-2024, the situation in Jammu and Kashmir remains complex and fragile. On the surface, there is a semblance of normalcy. The streets of Srinagar are not witnessing the massive protests of the past, and tourists are returning to enjoy the scenic beauty of the Gulmarg and Pahalgam valleys. The government is pushing a narrative of development and integration. However, beneath this calm surface, there is a deep sense of political uncertainty and anxiety among the people. The local population feels a deep sense of political disempowerment following the abrogation of Article 370. The future of Jammu and Kashmir depends not just on security measures or economic pledges, but on winning back the trust of its people and finding a durable political solution that respects their aspirations.